how do you determine who's right to take the risk of entrepreneurship? And what's your take on the risk of getting into this small business acquisition part of entrepreneurship?
Both Rick and I, after careful examination, feel that entrepreneurship through acquisition is dramatically different from entrepreneurship through startup with respect to risk. And the reason that is because when you buy a small firm, you're buying a company that has been around for 10, 20, 30 years. You can look at its historic financials and see what its revenues are, its profits. It has a team of people that know how to do the work. It has a collection of satisfied customers. You can measure their pattern of recurringly buying the company's product. And so you know a great deal about the business, not only how it operates, but how stable and predictable it is. And this is just a complete world of difference from starting a business up where you know almost none of those facts. And so even though they're both linked together as entrepreneurship, this type of entrepreneurship, while it's surely not without risk, is dramatically lower risk than starting a small business. And almost always when you buy these companies, part of the purchase is a transition agreement with the seller so that you sort of have a smooth onboarding. So, when Rick and I look at this, we do think there are a couple of risks. One risk is you could spend some time looking for a business to buy and not succeeding. That's a risk. But to us, it's a very controlled risk, right? You're missing out on some salary, you're delaying career alternatives for a while, but it's hardly a dramatic risk. And the other risk is that you buy a company that's been successful in the past and ceases to be successful under your management. And while that is certainly a risk, that happens very few times in entrepreneurship through acquisition, and we can talk about that in more detail. So the first thing I'd say is the risks are really very controlled in this space.
Those people who get a lot of social value out of their careers, they want to be able to meet interesting coworkers. Maybe they're single and they're interested in having a life mate, and they're going to find that by somebody who they're going to meet through a work experience. The social side of work. They want to work with people who are like them. They want to work in highly resourced organizations. Those combinations of people probably are not terrific, at least when they're coming right out of school for this path. But if you tend to get your social interests elsewhere, your work can be separate from your social. You don't feel that you need some affiliation to feel fulfilled. And you love the idea of having executive control, taking this blank page every morning and figuring out what's important to do. For those people, this is a great path. And by the way, that's what I think draws a lot of our veterans into this path. Veterans, particularly as an officer, you're given lots of control over how you execute your mission, whatever that mission happens to be. In big companies, that's not the case. And so they miss that autonomy. They miss that. That's what I meant by executive control.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. Yeah, and so you're not the one making the pie if that's your business. You're the one building the business that makes a lot of pies, and you've got to be really interested in the widgets, the behind the scenes, and the systems and the people almost more than the product that's delivered itself in some ways.
That's a very good insight that you've just communicated, because you're right. People who are drawn to entrepreneurship through acquisition are drawn by that challenge of being a manager, managing people and creating marketing strategies and overseeing product. They're less focused on what the particular product or service is. They're a little bit more agnostic and more interested in managing. And that can be a dividing line between people who choose startup and people who choose entrepreneurship through acquisition.
To use your analogy, most people who start bakeries are really good at baking and are fascinated by the idea of, cutting up apples and how to make the right crust and making that delicious apple pie. They may not have that skill at actually making the pie in a cost-effective way and pricing it properly and distributing it properly and the like, and marketing it properly. So those are the skills that are often required to take that bakery to the next level. I think about entrepreneurship, startup is, you might not have ever seen a pie before, and you're now inventing this idea that you could put these, interesting ingredients with some crispy crust on top, and you don't have a recipe, and you don't have pricing, and you don't have a model, and you don't know if it's going to work. And so for most of these, you finally do the equivalent of baking a pie, and you're very excited about your prototype pie. You don't know how to price it, and you don't know what the competition's like. You don't know what other pies are out there. So this is a lot easier. You buy a business that people have proven that it has an effective model. You can improve the model, but it begins with a starting point where you know that the company under its previous management can produce the product and sell the product at a profit.